Good day, everybody. As you come in and take your seats, please either just think about it with yourself or alternatively turn to your desk partner and respond to the following prompt that's on the board. Imagine you are a soldier in the American Revolution. What scares you the most? What fate keeps you up at night? So take a few minutes to think about this answer, discuss with your partner, and then we'll come back as a class to share out your answers. Yes. Good. Alright, following our discussion, our lecture today will be on smallpox in the American Revolution. One of you hit on disease and illness as a fate that would scare you. This is one that kept many a soldier up at night. Now, the American colonists were not unfamiliar with smallpox. However, there hadn't been a large-scale epidemic in a while, so most of the young men were not immune. Now, what might happen when you have young men all gathering together, and if they're not immune? Well, we shall soon find out. But first, let's learn a little bit more about what smallpox is, how it's spread, what it looks like, what it does to you, and just why it was so deadly and significant for the Continental Army. Alright, so it is a bacterial disease, smallpox. It is spread through face-to-face contact or coming in contact with an item that someone who has the disease has interacted with. So clothing, tools, anything that they might have had little particles on or touched. It is highly, highly contagious, but it has an incubation period. It's incubation meaning it sits within you and you're not aware you have it, of about a week or two. That's why you can interact with somebody. 2 weeks later, you get sick. You have no idea. We're all quite familiar with that these last few years. So it has an incubation period of about 2 weeks. And then, get ready for the gross part, guys. The telltale pustules start to come out. Now, I've spared you images of that, thankfully, but they generally are small to large. As you can imagine, little pustules that come up on your feet, your hands, in your throat, in your mouth, and around your face, and additionally all over your body. They can go into each other, they can ooze, and when they burst, they tend to burst into each other, spreading the infection. The disease is also characterized by fever and body aches. The disease is very deadly if you catch it the natural way. I'll explain other ways you can get it later in this lecture. Predominantly, people who are very young, very old, or who have underlying conditions are more prone to get it and pass away from smallpox. If you survive smallpox, you have smallpox scars that you have to deal with. You have the risk of being left blind or debilitated from other side effects. However, the silver lining of it all is once you catch smallpox, you will never get it again. You have a lifetime immunity to it. So, let's go back to the question that we started this lecture with. What happens when you have a bunch of young soldiers gathering together? A lot of them are coming from towns or country where they're definitely not immune to this disease. They're all intermingling with one another. And based on our prior knowledge from other lectures, being a soldier was not great. You were not overly healthy. Yes. Correct. Everybody ends up getting sick. And that is exactly what happened in the winter of 1775-1776 in Quebec. So it's not an exaggeration. There was chaos in Quebec. As we learned earlier in this unit, Benedict Arnold took an expedition up through the Maine wilderness and over into Quebec in fall of 1775. He was followed shortly behind by Richard Montgomery, who went up through Vermont and over into Canada. Now, the failed siege of Quebec was on December 31st, 1775. That did not go well, as we learned. And what happens to all the soldiers who are just sitting there? They can't go home. They can, but some of their enlistments aren't up, and it's a longer trek home through the now snowy woods. So what are you going to do? Until spring. These men are already very tired, very weak, very hungry from their expedition, from the battle. They don't have good clothing for winter. They do not have proper supplies or adequate shelter. So with that, disease runs rampant, especially smallpox. Now, there are some rumors that some soldiers reported that they thought they heard British telling the citizens of Quebec who were infected with smallpox to go out and go amongst the soldiers. Whether those rumors are true or not, that's up to the history books and up to interpretation. But what was true is soldiers were falling ill by the dozens. As soon as reinforcements would come, they started getting sick. Now, earlier I mentioned catching smallpox in the natural way. There was another way you could get it. Inoculation. Now, inoculation had been debated in the colonies for a few decades before the Revolutionary War. Some were in favor of it, some were not. Inoculation's kind of like vaccination now, but a little bit different. That you can learn more about in your research later, and I hope you do. But inoculation, you would take a part of the live disease, so you might go to your friend who had smallpox, take a little bit from his pustule, put it on a needle, stick yourself with it, and that would give you a milder case of smallpox. Still get it, but be milder, less dramatic, less symptoms, and you would be more likely to survive. Some of the soldiers wanted to do that. They wanted to inoculate themselves. However, the army put in sweeping orders saying there will be no inoculation. None. They couldn't afford to lose the manpower. Some soldiers, however, they didn't want to take the risk of catching smallpox in the natural way. If they were sick, they got some of the disease from their friend, spread it around, inoculated themselves. In that process, they would take the disease, stick themselves under their nail, go about their day. They would have less symptoms. They would look sick like everybody else. Now, they would be just as able to spread the disease, though. And if you were caught inoculating, if you were an enlisted man, so as we went over, a private, a corporal, or a sergeant, you would be drummed out, dishonorably discharged. If you were an officer, you would be court-martialed. Either way, not good. So, we're going into 1776. The Army is dealing with the massive issue of, can we survive and fight against the British? And what do we do about disease? Well. Oh, no, we're not there yet. Excuse me. I did mention the possibility of germ warfare. There's no proof, but there's some belief that there could have been. There's an idea that from Lord Dunmore's proclamation, we learned about that earlier in the unit, that through his encouraging African Americans, free and enslaved men, and to an extent women, to come to the camps to join the British forces, he thought they were immune, or they could spread the disease to the continental soldiers, or deplete the forces that they might use of men who were immune. Now, the British and their Hessian allies already had immunity by growing up in Europe that frequently experienced smallpox epidemics. So the British forces were in largely better shape for dealing with this disease, and some Continentals thought they were going to use that to their advantage. Now, the army's on the brink of disaster, smallpox is running rampant, nobody's quite sure what to do. But here comes the general. George Washington enters the picture, and the inoculation debate continues. So, as we discussed earlier in the course, George Washington took command at Cambridge, Massachusetts in early summer 1775. At this point in our timeline, we're to summer 1776. The army has come back from Quebec, the British have left Boston, and now Washington is staring down the British guns and ships along with the Hessian allies at Long Island. So you have the Battle of Brooklyn, Battle of Kips Bay, as we discussed. The Continentals are retreating through New York and getting into New Jersey with the battles of Fort Washington and Fort Lee. And all the while, they are still dealing with diseases like smallpox. Washington, who as a boy had smallpox the natural way, wasn't too keen on inoculation. He didn't think it was worth it, he didn't think early enough it was safe enough, and most importantly, he knew the army could not afford to lose an entire regiment or two in the middle of summer, in the middle of fighting. So he said no one's getting inoculated. If you inoculate yourself and you're caught with the tools to self-inoculate, you will be punished as you were in Quebec. That still didn't stop soldiers from self-inoculating. They were more afraid of the germs and disease of smallpox than they were of British cannon shot. So, through the fall of 1776, the Continental soldiers keep retreating down through New Jersey, and just as a quick reminder, if you guys have any questions at any point about the timeline, please don't hesitate to ask. And by the winter of 76-77, we get dual victories at Trenton and Princeton. Following the Battle of Princeton, Washington moves up to Morristown, New Jersey, and the Continental Army is safe, snug in the Watchung Mountains near Morristown. I wouldn't say they're snug and warm, but they are safer. And this is when Washington reconsiders the inoculation question. He now knows, okay, we have a victory. We have 2 victories under our belts. I have my men for the next campaign season. It's winter. No one's gonna fight in the winter. I can't really stop my men from self-inoculating. They are going to. And Washington was realizing what a lot of the other generals had come to realize. His men were going to do what they thought was best for their health, for the health of their comrades. And if that meant a mass all self-inoculated and risked the dishonor of being drummed out, then they did. They did not want to get each other any sicker than they were. So winter of 1777, Washington approves inoculation, and they start the process regiment by regiment. So as one regiment finishes their inoculation process, the last scab from the final pustule falls off. They're immune to smallpox. Another comes in, and that way there's always a constant supply of guards, of men who can be on duty, while there are men healing from the inoculation process. And this works well. This works very well for a while, but things always tend to change. Am I on? Right. Yes, I'm sorry. Just want to check it on the right slide. The changing tides of war. By 1779-ish, 1780, the British realized they are no longer going to win the war in New England. New England had been a thorn in their side since the beginning. Yes. They are also no longer going to win it in the middle colonies. New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland are all pretty well entrenched on the Patriot side, so they move south. This changes the makeup of both the British and the Continental Army. More runaway slaves join both the British and the Americans, hoping that by fighting for either side, they will get freedom when they win the war. More go to the British, because the British promised freedom if they joined. The Americans, not so much, but a lot of these enslaved men were not immune to smallpox. So the British were, but they were spreading it to other troops. You have a changing number of indigenous groups siding on either side who had not had previous experience with smallpox. They too were falling ill. You had less full-time soldiers in the Continental Army and more reliance on militiamen. As we discussed, militias were short-term servicemen. Handful of months, they sign up, they go home. By the time your man signed up, got outfitted in the field, he didn't have time to inoculate. So if one man in a militia company got sick, he would spread smallpox to the rest of his militia company, go home, and potentially spread that to his family, his community, and you would have entire militia groups unfortunately wiped out because of smallpox. However, the inoculation process still did continue. Washington tried his best to enforce it, and smallpox was never again the biggest issue, biggest disease as the army moved south and as the revolution went on. Really after 1777, 1778, smallpox no longer held the place it did, but it was still of critical importance. Other diseases, however, would come to take that spot. Alright, I want you to turn back to your partner and discuss some of these questions. So you are a Continental soldier up in Canada during the winter of 1776, 1777, and you're concerned about smallpox. You see your friends getting sick from it, and you want to inoculate, but you know the risks of doing so. But you also know what it costs to catch the disease the natural way. What do you do? I want you guys to also make a prediction. What other diseases might have been just as bad, if not worse, as smallpox? Was there anything potentially as bad as smallpox? What other illnesses did a soldier have to fear at this time? And now the third question I want you to discuss as a group is the idea of germ warfare. Do you think it is a strategic tactic? Do you think it is something that an army could, should, might employ? Do you think that this can be done? Or is disease more of a, if your enemy catches it, they catch it, it's a random thing that you cannot control? I will give you guys a few minutes to discuss this, then we will come back as a class to share out some answers. I will mingle around with you guys. Mingling. Alright. Thank you for that lovely discussion, everybody. And as you might have guessed, class activity. So, I will pass out these worksheets, in which you'll be tasked to either work yourself, with a partner, or a group of 3, to select one of a few diseases I put down. Do not fill out smallpox. We'll do that tomorrow as a class. Your choices are between infection, dysentery, pneumonia, rheumatism, scurvy and other malnutrition-related diseases, and malaria. Again, you may work by yourself, with a partner, or in a group of 3. Use your textbooks, online resources to fill out that worksheet. and in the end we will share out some of our answers. As always, I will mingle around while you're doing the activity, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have about today's lecture or this unit in general.